When my cousin called to say he was coming over with his old PlayStation 2, I was immediately hit with a wave of nostalgia. Memories of endless weekends spent gaming flashed through my mind, and I felt a thrill at the thought of reliving those carefree days. My cousin arrived, grinning ear to ear, the familiar console tucked under his arm like a cherished relic from our past. We set up in the living room, where the dim light from the setting sun filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. The TV was an ancient beast, its screen slightly fuzzy and edges worn, but it added to the charm of our retro gaming session. We dug through a box of dusty games, each title bringing back a flood of memories, and finally settled on one of our old favorites. As we booted up the console, the familiar startup sound filled the room, instantly transporting us back to those simpler times. We settled onto the worn-out couch, controllers in hand, and launched into the game. The excitement was palpable, a shared energy that seemed to light up the room more than the flickering images on the screen. This was our world for the afternoon. Just the two of us, the soft glow of the TV, and the anticipation of hours lost in the virtual realms we used to know so well. Little did we know that this nostalgic escape would soon turn into something we couldn't explain or forget. As we dove into the game, everything felt just as it did all those years ago. We were back in our element, fingers dancing over the controllers with the ease of muscle memory. The room seemed to fade away as we immersed ourselves in the virtual world, the bright colors and fast-paced action on the screen drawing us in completely. But as we played, I started noticing odd occurrences that I couldn't quite explain. There were strange sounds coming from the console, like faint whispers or distant static, just on the edge of my hearing. At first, I thought it was just the old machine struggling to keep up, but then there were glitches, unexpected freezes, and bizarre in-game events that neither of us remembered being part of the game. Enemies appeared where they shouldn't have been, and parts of the game world seemed to distort, the graphics warping into unsettling shapes before snapping back to normal. Each time it happened, I'd glance over at my cousin, but he seemed oblivious, lost in his own gaming zone. Time slipped away from us unnoticed, the afternoon light outside dimming as the hours flew by. We were so absorbed in the game that we hardly spoke, communicating through quick nods and shared laughter whenever we accomplished something spectacular. It was as if the game had cast a spell over us, and we were helpless to resist its pull. I didn't realize how much time had passed until I glanced at the clock, feeling a sudden chill as I saw how late it had gotten. But even then, the thought of stopping seemed impossible, the game compelling us to continue. In hindsight, I wish I had paid more attention to the unease that was slowly building inside me, an unspoken tension that hung in the air, unnoticed amid the thrill of our gaming adventure. As the final game credits rolled, my cousin and I let out a collective sigh of satisfaction. We had conquered the game once again, just like we used to, but as I reached to turn off the console, a strange sense of unease crept over me. The controller felt colder than it should have, and the TV screen flickered oddly before going black. I looked down and my heart nearly stopped. The PlayStation 2 was sitting there, just as we had set it up, but something was very wrong. The video cable wasn't connected to the TV. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the power cord, only to find that it wasn't plugged into the outlet at all. I stared at the disconnected wires, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hey, check this out," I called to my cousin, my voice sounding strange and distant in my ears. He came over, his brow furrowed in confusion, and together we stared at the impossibility in front of us. We had been playing for hours, completely immersed in the game, but the console had never been connected. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fear. I could only shake my head, equally baffled. We both checked the cables again, trying to find any logical explanation, but there was none. The PS2 hadn't been plugged in at all. An eerie silence settled over the room, thicker and more oppressive than before. The familiar hum of the console was absent, replaced by the sound of our breathing and the distant ticking of the clock. The impossible truth hung in the air between us, a chilling reminder that something beyond our understanding had just taken place. I glanced at my cousin, and the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. This was no ordinary gaming session, and whatever had happened, it defied all logic. The room felt colder, and the shadows seemed to creep closer, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. With shaking hands, I carefully unplugged the PlayStation 2 and placed it back in the wardrobe, locking the door behind it. My cousin and I exchanged a look, an unspoken agreement that some things were better left untouched. But the unease lingered, and I knew we'd never look at that old console the same way again. After my cousin left that evening, the house felt unnaturally quiet, like it was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled over me, a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. My mind raced, replaying the day's events, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how I turned it over in my head, I couldn't rationalize it. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I called my cousin later that night, hoping he might have some explanation, or maybe just to hear him say it was all some elaborate prank. But he was as shaken as I was, his voice still tinged with disbelief. We talked through every detail, trying to find some logical explanation, but none of it added up. Maybe the TV was on some kind of demo mode, he suggested weakly. Or maybe we both just imagined it, both of us, for hours? I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. It doesn't make any sense. The more we talked, the more I realized that nothing would make the feeling go away. There was something deeply unsettling about what had happened, something that defied all logic and reason. And that sense of dread lingered long after we hung up the phone. I avoided going near the wardrobe where I had locked the PlayStation 2, as if even being close to it might awaken whatever strange power it held. At night, I imagined I could hear faint noises coming from within, like the soft hum of a console booting up, but I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Every time I walked past it, I felt a prickling on the back of my neck, a sensation that something was watching, waiting. It was ridiculous, of course. A dusty old console couldn't hold any real threat. But the fear persisted, creeping into my dreams and making my skin crawl in the dark. Eventually, I made a decision. The PlayStation 2 would stay locked away in the wardrobe, and I'd do my best to forget about it. Maybe time would dull the edges of the fear, turn the memory into just another strange story to tell someday. But for now, I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Whatever had happened that day, I had no intention of finding out more. Some doors were better left closed. Days turned into weeks, but the uneasy feeling never completely went away. Every time I passed by the wardrobe, I felt a knot form in my stomach. It was as if the PlayStation 2 inside had a presence of its own, something dark and watchful that made the air feel heavy. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, strange things started happening around the house. Lights flickered without reason, plunging rooms into darkness for moments at a time before blinking back to life. The TV would turn on by itself, static filling the screen in the middle of the night, its ghostly glow casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when I was alone, soft and deliberate, as though someone or something was pacing just out of sight. Doors creaked open and shut, even when there was no breeze to move them. I tried to brush it off, blame it on faulty wiring or the house settling, but deep down, I knew better. My dreams were haunted by the memory of that day, vivid images of the game world bleeding into my sleep. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I'd heard the console's familiar hum in the dark. It was like the game had followed us back into reality, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left unresolved. I spoke to my cousin about it a few times, hoping he might have a different perspective, but he admitted to similar experiences. We both agreed that whatever had happened that day wasn't natural, that we had opened a door to something we didn't understand. The wardrobe became a symbol of my fear, a constant reminder that some mysteries were best left unsolved. I avoided it as much as possible, feeling its presence like a cold shadow at my back whenever I dared to linger nearby. I considered getting rid of the PlayStation 2 entirely, but a part of me feared what might happen if I tried. In the end, I accepted the haunting realization that some doors, once opened, could never be closed completely. The memory of that afternoon lingered, a ghost that refused to be forgotten, whispering of worlds beyond our own where the rules didn't apply. Whatever we had unleashed, it was a part of us now, woven into the fabric of our reality. And so, life continued, with a constant reminder that the line between our world and another was thinner than I'd ever imagined. I could only hope that, over time, the presence would fade and I'd find some semblance of peace. Until then, I learned to live with the shadows, knowing that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved.